I never imagined that at 64, life would still find new ways to unsettle me. The farm had always been predictable, comforting in its routines, the same fields, the same animals, the same quiet that settled in after my husband passed away. Over the years, that quiet became my refuge, my sanctuary. I told myself I didn't need anything more. That was before Jimmy arrived. He had come to help for a few weeks, at first, fixing fences, lifting what I no longer could, making sure I wasn't pushing myself too hard. He was in his mid-20s now, no longer the boy who used to run through these fields with scraped knees and endless energy. He carried himself differently, confident, grounded, alive in a way that startled me. I hadn't realized how much I missed another voice in the house until I heard his footsteps each morning. That day felt ordinary at first. The sun hung high, warm against my skin, the breeze carrying the familiar scent of hay and earth. We worked side by side in the barn, moving bales, feeding the animals. I caught myself noticing small things, the way he focused on each task, the patience in his movements, the quiet care he took not to rush me. It was harmless, or at least that's what I told myself. When we stopped to rest by the fence overlooking the fields, the sky was already beginning to soften into evening colors. Pink and gold stretched across the horizon. Jimmy leaned back against the wood, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at me in a way that lingered just a moment too long. "You've built something incredible here, Aunt Sua," he said. His voice was steady, sincere. "I don't know how you've done it all these years." I laughed it off, embarrassed. "It's just life. You keep going because you have to." He shifted closer, not deliberately. At least it didn't feel that way. His arm brushed mine. The contact was brief, innocent on the surface, yet my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I became suddenly aware of the space between us, or rather how little of it remained. There was a silence then, not awkward, heavy. I wanted to speak, to redirect the moment, to say anything that would restore the familiar boundaries I'd always relied on. But my thoughts felt tangled, my heart louder than it had any right to be. Jimmy looked at me differently, not with entitlement, not with expectation, but with something softer, something searching. And in that look I felt an unexpected recognition, as if he wasn't just seeing me as his aunt or as the woman who owned the farm, but as someone real, someone still capable of being noticed. He placed his hand over mine, not gripping, not claiming, just resting there as if grounding himself. The warmth of it startled me. "I don't mean to make this strange," he said quietly. Being here with you feels different." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't, because in that moment I realized the truth I had been avoiding. It wasn't his words that unsettled me. It was how deeply I understood them. Nothing happened after that. No confession. No crossing of lines. Just two people sitting in the fading light, holding still, both aware that something fragile had surfaced between us, something neither of us knew how to name, and neither of us was ready to face. But I knew one thing as the sun disappeared beyond the fields. This was no longer just about help on the farm. And whatever had begun that evening, it would not be so easily undone. The days that followed carried a strange weight, as though the farm itself had shifted without changing at all. The same chores, the same paths through the fields. Yet every interaction felt layered now, filled with pauses that hadn't existed before. Jimmy stayed busy, throwing himself into the work with the same steady focus, but I noticed how often he slowed his pace to match mine. How he listened more than he spoke, how his attention lingered, not in a way that demanded, but in a way that waited. That waiting unsettled me. We spoke less about practical things and more about everything else, about how time moves differently when you're alone, about the quiet that creeps in when the house no longer holds shared routines. I told him stories I hadn't repeated in years, about my husband, about the early days of the farm, about mistakes I'd made and paths I hadn't taken. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything. And somehow that made it harder to step back. One afternoon, while we worked near the apple trees at the far edge of the property, the light fell just right. Late sun filtered through the leaves, turning everything soft and gold. Jimmy stood beside me with a crate in his arms, his attention briefly caught when he noticed me watching him. Neither of us spoke. It wasn't desire that filled the space between us. It was recognition. Two people noticing the same thing at the same time and not knowing what to do with it. "I've been trying to understand something," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "Why being here feels heavier, in a good way." I looked away, focusing on the apples in my hands. "Places carry history," I replied. "They make you feel things you didn't expect." He nodded, but I sensed that wasn't the answer he was searching for. Later that evening, we sat on the porch as the sky darkened. The farm settled into its nighttime rhythm, crickets, distant wind, the familiar creak of old wood. Jimmy sat close enough that I could feel the warmth from his shoulder, though we never touched. "I don't want to cross any lines," he said suddenly. "I just want to be honest about how being here affects me." The words stayed with me long after he went inside. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, confronting a truth that had been quietly forming. It wasn't about him wanting something from me. It was about what his presence had awakened, how easily I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen without being needed. The next morning, I made a choice that felt both protective and dangerous. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned into normalcy. Breakfast together, shared laughter over small mishaps, long conversations that circled close to something deeper without ever naming it. Each moment felt safe on the surface, yet charged underneath, like a current running just below calm water. I could have stopped it then, drawn clear boundaries, reasserted the roles we both understood. But part of me wasn't ready to let go of the feeling yet, the reminder that I was still capable of connection, of emotional closeness that didn't come from obligation or memory. Nothing was said out loud, nothing was acted upon. And yet, with every passing day, it became harder to ignore the quiet truth settling between us. Whatever this was, it was growing, not in action, but in awareness. By the end of the week, the farm felt smaller, as though the space between us had narrowed without either of us moving closer. Everything had stayed within lines that were never drawn, yet the weight of what remained unsaid pressed harder than any confession could have. On the final afternoon, the sky turned gray and low, the kind of weather that quiets the land and forces you inward. Jimmy finished repairing a fence near the lower field while I watched from the porch, pretending to read. When he came back up, his steps slowed as if he already knew what was coming. "I leave tomorrow," he said. Not as a statement, but as a question. I nodded. "I know." We stood there for a moment, the wind tugging at loose boards, the house behind us filled with memories that suddenly felt louder than the present. He didn't reach for me. I didn't invite him to sit. And yet, the space between us felt charged, alive with everything we had carefully avoided naming. "I don't regret coming," he said. "Whatever this week was, it mattered." That was the moment I understood what I had to do. "I'm glad you came," I replied. "But some things are meant to remind us who we are, not to become something we act on." He looked down, then back up, his expression steady, thoughtful. "You're saying this was a mirror?" "Yes," I said softly. "For both of us." We walked once more through the fields as dusk settled, not side by side this time, but close enough to feel the shared silence. There was no drama in it, no final moment meant to seal or shatter anything, just the quiet understanding that not every powerful feeling is meant to be consumed. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. I thought about how easy it would have been to mistake emotional awakening for destiny, how loneliness can disguise itself as connection if you aren't careful. But I also felt something else, gratitude, for the reminder that I was still capable of feeling deeply, for the proof that life, even at 64, could still surprise me without undoing me, for the clarity that came from choosing restraint not out of fear but out of self-respect. The next morning, we said goodbye without ceremony. A hug, a quiet smile, no promises, no lingering looks meant to reopen what we had closed with care. When his truck disappeared down the dirt road, the farm returned to its usual stillness. The same chores waited, the same routines. Yet something inside me had shifted permanently, not toward longing, but toward wholeness. Some stories don't end with confession or consequence. They end with understanding. And sometimes the bravest choice isn't stepping forward or walking away. It's knowing exactly where to stop. If this story made you think about emotional boundaries, loneliness, or the quiet choices that shape our lives, share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same decision